to the Through the Veil podcast. I'm Elle.
I'm Camille.
I'm Rachel.
Today, the three of us are back again. I always like it when all three of us are here.
Me too.
Um, Today, we're going to pick into like the meat and bones a little bit about what spirit communication is and how it works for us, like what our process is, how we connect with spirits through the veil, and what that feels like. And maybe we're going to share some experiences with you guys. I think that there's a lot of curiosity about what it is and what it feels like and what it actually looks like for people that haven't experienced it before.
And if you are just joining us for the first time, let me just put a plug that you should probably pause and go watch the specific interviews with Camille and Elle further back in the timeline.
It's like the first episode or the second episode and the third episode are the ones where Camille and I share our stories specifically and a little bit more about what it is that we do.
I think context is important when you're doing this because we're just going to hop in and hit it hard and start talking about the step-by-step process that these ladies experience when they spirit communicate. And so it's good to have that kind of foundation where you know who they are going into it. And also, I think it's important that we plug our monthly meetups here too, because we do exercises for helping you develop your abilities to spirit communicate and figuring out what your spiritual gifts might be. So definitely join those. It's a bunch of like-minded, cool, normal people. It's not weird, I promise.
We make
It's
it
the
normal.
last Thursday of every month. So the last Thursday of every month, it's 7 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Mountain, 9 Central, and 10
Central
o'clock. And 10
Eastern.
o'clock Eastern. Yeah.
Also, plug for the Facebook community if you're not already on that and you have any interest. Maybe you don't have any development, you don't know what your spiritual gifts are. That's fine. We're not exclusive here. Even if you have any interest in these gifts or developing your own gifts, our Facebook community is a great place to start also, where we can start building that community and communicating with each other, asking questions, answering questions, and chatting a little bit, getting to know people.
Yeah. And you can find that link from our website, which is just throughtheveilpodcast.com. It has a big button on the homepage to join the community. So easy.
I'm seeing the future, and I'm seeing that Camille is going to disappear midway through this interview. So when you don't see her anymore and or hear her anymore, it is because she had a family emergency that she had to duck out from. So we just continued the conversation without her. We miss her. She'll be back next time. Let's get into it, ladies. I want you to tell me first what your spiritual gift is, okay? And then break down the process step by step. What happens when you go to use this gift? Elle, you start.
I'll start. So the spiritual gift would fall under the gift of discernment, specifically the gift of discerning spirits. If you want to get more specific, of beholding angels and ministering spirits. That's kind of the blanket of what that falls under. That could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. I think a lot of people experience that in different and very individual ways. The way that I experience it probably will be a little bit different than the way Camille experiences it, though it falls under some kind of like standard things. Um, as I talked about before in my interview, I mean, I have had experiences since I was very small, but learning how to use them was a whole different game. So I have been doing one-on-one sessions or private sessions with people for going on 5 years now. So I've had lots of practice. I've had, hundreds and hundreds of sessions with people. And I have been blessed to really be able to hone it to a greater degree maybe than I had earlier off. So I think a lot of people, if they're familiar with spirit communication at all, I mean, it's in the media right now. It goes under a different name. The world would call this mediumship, right? This is connecting through the veil to spirits on the other side. We use the term spirit communication because it's a spiritual gift. I mean, personally, I have a very strong connection with this through my faith and through God. And I think it is more of a sacred calling than that. It's not something that I take lightly. It's not something, I mean, most people who have any familiarity with this gift would know big names like Teresa Caputo or Tyler Henry or James Van Prague, right? These people that they've seen on TV do this. And it works in a similar facet, except that the way that I kind of view the operation of this gift is a little bit maybe more sacred. It's a little more special. And it is to bring healing and love and light and connection to people. But if you've ever seen someone like that work, it works in a very similar process. So what I am doing myself is I am trying to clear my mind. I'm trying to bring myself out of the forefront and allow there to be space for spirit to communicate with me. And so um, that took a long time to practice because our minds are the monkey mind. We're busy all the time. We always have thoughts try to intrude in. And I think even in the matter of like hearing answers to prayer or hearing the Holy Spirit, people are like, well, how do I know if it's me or how do I know if it's not me? Huge question. Everybody has this question. And the only answer is it comes through experience. It comes through experience knowing what your mind voice sounds like, what your spirit sounds like, and what the Holy Spirit sounds like. Well, spirit communication is the same thing. Who are you? What does your mind sound like? What is your answer? What is your, um, your mind voice sound like? And what does somebody else's sound like? And sometimes that is more difficult to pick apart. There are a lot of different ways that spirits can come through. Sometimes they'll speak to you in an almost audible voice. That's really easy when that happens because you can know that it's not you. Sometimes they're going to give you an image. Sometimes they're going to give you a feeling. Sometimes they're going to give you just a random thought. And it's a little harder to pick apart. Did I just think of ice cream in my mind? Did I just see that just now? Or was it something else, right? Um, so being able to clearly know that, I think, is a huge hurdle in the process. But once, like, I overcame that, it's about clearing that mind space, allowing spirit to have a place to speak to you in your mind stage is the analogy I like to use. You have to get, left center and allow them to have that center stage bit. And then spirits will show you things. They will show you themselves. They'll show you things about themselves. They'll show you memories. Maybe spirits will speak to you. You'll hear their voice, or um, you can hear it audibly, or maybe in your mind context. Maybe they'll show you feelings. They'll show you impressions. Sometimes you feel it in your physical body. Sometimes they'll give you thoughts that'll just come out of nowhere randomly with no context. So a lot of it has to do with personal preparation and then allowing that to happen. And then the heavy part is trusting that it is from spirit. Um, and then a lot of that comes through validation. So um, being brave enough to just throw out there, I'm getting this, and I think it's not for me, and having someone go, yes, that's correct. That it totally is what my grandma looks like. And you're like, beautiful. Okay, she's here. I couldn't have known that otherwise. I feel her here with us. I'm not crazy. Um, I think that's a huge step to the process too, as well.
Okay, pause here because I have questions. Okay. One, you need to tell us specifically what is happening. Okay. So you said you clear your
Yeah.
mind. What does that mean? Did you meditate? Did you pray? What did you do going into it? Okay. And then two, what does it feel like when you do start to hear? Like, how do you know that? Because you said, oh, grandma's here. Do you feel them in the room? Do you see them in the room? How are you experiencing it?
I think it really depends. Sometimes I'll feel a spirit in the room. Sometimes I can feel a physical presence come up right next to me, or I can see a physical presence come up right behind someone. I've had it happen numerous times where sometimes it is an actual, like an image of a person. You can see a full body apparition, if you want to call it that. Sometimes it's more like a bending of light. Sometimes it's an impression. It's like this feels like there's a person there, even if I can't see them. Sometimes it's more internal than that. Sometimes it will just feel like um, you're not alone in the room, and you can't tell exactly where they are in the room, but it feels like there's another entity here with you in the room, and you can just get an impression of what that is. You can't necessarily pinpoint, okay, they're to my back left, but you know that there's this person here, and then they come and they start introducing themselves to you. You get an impression, okay, this is a male. He is in his mid 30s, and he's telling me he's connected to this person. He's their uncle. And then they start to give you information about them. You can oftentimes, for me personally, one of the first things I tend to feel about somebody is their personality. It'll come through. So, like when you're with someone, live one-on-one in person, you can kind of get a sense for who they are, whether that's how they dress, that their body movements, the way that they're speaking. They have a personality, and most of our personalities are really apparent. Spirits are the same way. Oftentimes, right away, I will know, oh, you're a vivacious person. You've got a great sense of humor. Or they're very shy, like very reticent to come through all the way and be very forthcoming with information. Um, Oftentimes that is one of the first things that I'll feel about someone. So yeah, sometimes you'll see them in the room and sometimes it'll be more of like an impression that you get.
And so what are you feeling in your body?
That will also depend. I like to say that spirits have just as much variety as we do because they're individuals. Some people have a big presence and they come forward and they're just loud and you're like, whoa, tone it down, pull it back. And some people are a little more reserved and a little harder to notice. And it also depends on the setting too, because I think a lot of people have this impression that somebody who has this gift, especially a gift strongly with spirit communication, is on all the time. And it's like you're seeing people everywhere, right? They're standing around in their room and everything. Most cases this is not this way. It is not this way because our purpose here is to live your life first and foremost, right? Your purpose here isn't to be seeing everyone's people all the time. You have to be able to live your life, function within the purpose of why you're here on earth. And that is center stage. And everything else happens auxiliary to that. And so a lot of people have to learn to tune into it or to tune out a little more. But most of the time, you can be more sensitive to these things in quiet moments, in moments where you're not really fully engaged or really like highly stimulated in other ways. That doesn't mean that things don't happen in a movie theater when you're sitting there eating popcorn in a loud action scene and you're like, oh, there's an empty seat that's not empty behind me, you know? Or in an audience of like 10,000 people at a concert or at a show or something, and you're like, that guy lost his mom, and his mom is standing right behind him. I wonder if he knows that. Doesn't mean that those things don't occur, but more frequently than not, they're easier to notice, whether that's in your body or whether that's in the room, when you either intentionally tune into it or when it's quiet and you're not distracted by other overt things happening around you.
Let's talk about that tuning in a little bit deeper, because you often talk about energetically the work that you have to do to get yourself
Right.
into that mind space in the first place. So let's go back to step one. What is Elle doing
Step
to
one, I'm like base level. So, like I said, I have been doing the in-person and over the phone like private sessions with people for about 5 years now. But last fall I started to mentor. I mentored both of you. And I really had to take it back to base. It's like when you are learning to drive and then you're teaching someone to drive, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot that. You do need a blinker right here. It's just autopilot. Going back to the base level of something, I would say if you're beginning the process, even when I am beginning the process, this happens much more quickly for me now. But you have to kind of sit with yourself for a minute. You have to kind of center yourself for a minute and get balance. You don't want to be an emotional high or an emotional low when you're trying to do these things because it's very distracting. You have to kind of be in a center place and find that inner calm, that inner peace to start with. And then you need to, usually I'll take a couple of centering breaths. um, I think right at the beginning when I started learning to do this, I would meditate a lot. I would do a lot of meditation just to kind of bring in that stillness, bring in that calm. There's a lot of different kinds. You can do guided meditations. Most of the time, I would just sit in silence, in stillness, and try to encapsulate that within me and bring in a little of that stillness to still my mind. And so before every time I would intentionally practice spirit communication, I would I would do that. I would bring in that meditation or bring in that silence and that stillness and kind of imagine in my mind stage, pushing everything else off to the side, moving it backstage, and then allowing that center stage to be open. And then, of course, you need to have somebody to communicate with. If you have a loved one in spirit, I can assure you they're aware of you. And probably they've communicated with you before in any number of signs or symbols or interactions with your life. And most of the time, I think I have not had maybe but one or two experiences where someone was unwilling to come forward to talk with their loved one. So most of the time, if you are thinking of grandma and you'd like to talk to grandma, reach out, like picture what grandma looks like and ask her if she's there. And I would say then see what you feel, see what you get, see how it feels in your body and the room around you, even because they come in different ways. Some people are body feelers, and you will like feel a hand on your shoulder, or someone wrap their arms around you, or someone come stand so close their shoulder touches. Some people aren't. Some people are more like energy feelers, just like, oh, the feeling of this room changed just now, and it feels like maybe somebody else might be here with me. Or sometimes you'll get a warm feeling in your chest, or you'll get, suddenly a blossoming of love that you weren't feeling before. Is that nostalgia for grandma, or maybe it's grandma? So practicing that consistently and getting a feel for that, I think, is the place to start that process, because you can begin to recognize what happens when you're trying to intentionally connect and what happens when you're not, like in just your regular body every day when you're just living your life. And that is where I started. And that is still where I start briefly at the beginning of every time I intentionally connect.
Perfect. Thank you. What is your step one, Camille?
So my step one before I'm trying to connect to somebody's loved one is definitely I have to meditate. I've been practicing this for just about a little over a year. I've been connecting to my own people for quite a bit longer, but to take the step to connect to somebody else's person requires me to really kind of get into that elevated mindset. So,
Right.
I have to make sure that I'm not carrying any like personal baggage or my own stress gets in the way. So just to get myself out of my own like mind and body for a second, do some meditation. I personally really like the Worth of Souls meditation podcast. That one really helps me kind of get focused more on like not just meditating, but like thinking about Heavenly Father and Jesus and Heavenly Mother. It's a beautiful meditation that's guided. So something like that, to just find that stillness within myself, to separate my own feelings and my own thoughts. And then I like to think about like when I go to personally receive my own like messages from God. Let's say I go to like a church meeting and I really want to open up and get something from God for myself. I will bring a notebook and have a pen and just be sitting there. Like, okay, like I had for example, we were living in California. It was like 8 years ago. And I felt really like compelled to go to this one church event. It was on like a Tuesday night or something, and it was for women. And I wasn't planning on going because I had a lot of work to do and catch up. I'd just gotten home from vacation for a week, and I was like, I really don't have time to go, but I kept feeling compelled. So I just said, okay, God, I'm going to go. And I brought like a journal or notebook and a pen, and I just was like, why am I here? What do you want to tell me? And I got some really specific messages for our family. Like it was very, very unexpected. But I got messaging like that we were supposed to move out of state to go live in Utah. We had some family living there, and my husband and I worked from home. So it was just like, okay, this, and it was a really strong message. And it doesn't usually happen like that. But just like a few weeks ago, I went to a different church meeting and I brought it was one without like little kids, so I could really focus. My little kids weren't there. It was for our older kids and adults. So I'm sitting there with my notebook and my pen, and I really felt like it was my time to talk to God because I was sitting there. I was intentional. That's number one, is I had that intent. Number two is I was showing my intent by like having a pen and a pad of paper. Like I was ready to receive. So when I connect with somebody's loved one on the other side, I mentally prepare myself kind of by meditating. And then I'm very like, I have ADHD, and one of my like learning styles is kinesthetic. I like to be moving all the time. So for me, I have to have a pen and a pad of paper when I'm connecting because I want to write down those thoughts that come to my mind right away. I connect through movement. So having that something to write on, and I just try to quiet my brain and close my eyes. And I actually really like to try to pre-connect. So if I know that I'm gonna be talking to like a friend who wants to connect to this, grandma or whatever, I try to just do that meditation and sit with my notebook before we even sit down. I sit down with my friend. So I have a little bit of content before I jump into it. But I can also do it fresh. I can just sit there and just take a few minutes and just listen and try to block out what my brain is saying. And it takes practice. It's like learning a language, the language of the spirit, right? But to me, it's the language of the spirit is the same as like the portal through which spirits communicate with us, So if I can get familiar with how does God speak to me? How does the Holy Ghost speak to me? It's that similar muscle in my soul that can receive these messages from my friends and loved ones on the other side and others loved ones on the other side. So it's really just tuning into that frequency, which for me, I would say just is quieting my mind, connecting to like my higher power, God, and sitting with it and saying, okay, I'm ready. What do you want me to know? Just like I get most of my messages from cognitively. So claircognizance and then clairsentience, just feeling. And like Elle was saying, I get personality traits first. Usually, sometimes I'll get a quick visual of a physical like characteristic. For example, I was doing a session. We were practicing in our group, and it was for somebody's grandma. And earlier that week, actually, I had had 2 times. I had had this flash image in my head of like the TV show The Golden Girls. But I saw like the Golden Girls grandma. And I'm thinking, okay, all right. So maybe I'm going to be connecting with somebody's grandma later. And I didn't know it was set up that I would be, later in the next week. And it was just the Golden Girls grandma. And so I'm trying to connect to this girl's grandma. And I keep thinking about that Golden Girls grandma. And that doesn't necessarily mean she looks just like that, but it's more like the personality. She's bold and she says what's on her mind and she's funny. That's what I was getting from that. And that was the personality of the grandma. So it's like sometimes they visit me first, but if I just sit there and allow the spirit to talk to me, I get messages from them, usually in here and usually in here. But sometimes I see things as well. But I don't usually like the clairaudience where you hear. That's not as common for me.
Back to you, Elle. I know that the both of you, when you sit down to start, so there's the pre-work that we've talked about, right? Where you guys both meditate, you get into a certain mind state. Then right before you even start to communicate, I know something else happens that you
I say a
haven't.
prayer. I
Yes.
forgot to mention that I say a prayer. That happens even before I mean, it all happens so fast for me now. Like I will always start with a prayer. And I ask for the Holy Spirit to be with me. I ask for all of the help and I ask for the people that this person wants to connect with, that they will be clear and I will be clear. And then I do an open space. For me, I also have kind of like a visualization with it where I turn on my light. Like I put my open sign out to the world, like, all right, it's time, y'all. If you want to say something, now is the time. For me, and I know a lot of spirit communicators do that. For me, that visualization goes, those fair games that have the hammer that you hit the thing and then the weight goes and then ding, like it hits the fell at the top. I kind of like visualize my body as that I don't know what that is. The thermometer, the whatever it is, the scale that goes up to the top. And the little weight is like my connection. It's my level of consciousness or my energy. And I visualize it going all the way up to the top and then ding when it gets to the top. And then I have a visualization where I surround myself kind of like in a circle of light. That was for the beginning. There was a barrier. I was really afraid that something scary was going to come through. So this was my protection. And there are lots of different theories on whether or not you should do that. I personally, I just have this little ring of light that goes around, and then I have a table in the center of it. And I wipe off my little table, and I set a little candle stand, and I light my little candle, and I'm like, all right, now there's a door. Anybody who wants to come through, sit at my table, talk with me. And then usually almost immediately there are people lining up that want to have things to say. Sometimes I feel them, sometimes I see them, sometimes it's both.
And was it always that quick for you? In the very
Um,
beginning, what was that like?
So, like Camille was saying, it's a muscle. So, it's a muscle of focus and attention. And so, um, no, like, even though I always was sensitive and I always felt things, sometimes I saw things, doing it on command with someone specific is next level. It is a different thing altogether, as you know, Rachel. Um, and even just doing it generally with someone that you're connecting for specifically is a whole different game because a lot of times the people that we're used to connecting with are our own loved ones because they're the ones that are more involved in our specific lives, right? I had felt, my great grandmother before, I had felt my brother-in-law before, but I hadn't felt so and so's uncle before or their mother before. So I didn't know who they were. I didn't know it's like introducing yourself to a stranger for the first time. It's really intimidating, especially because I'm a naturally an introverted person. It's a muscle that you have to build up. And it's one that you build over time. And so I definitely took a lot of practice at the beginning. I remember the first time I connected intentionally to someone, it was a picture of a little girl and I knew nothing about this little girl. I just had this picture. And she had little curly blonde hair. She had a big smile. I think she had a little toy bike. And I was like, all right, like Camille said, I made the intention. I was going to talk to this person. And it took me probably 5 minutes of adamantly sitting in silence. It's like waiting, trying to like be faithfully waiting and like suspend my hardcore disbelief that this is gonna work. But I remember when she came in, I immediately knew. Um, she came in like a little ray of sunshine coming through a window on a cloudy day. It was like, bing. And I heard her voice, and then I felt her personality come in like a blossom, like in my mind, like a flower just opening up. And I knew who she was. And she told me all these things about her that checked out, that all ended up being accurate to who she was. And she had a message for her aunt, and it was beautiful. But there was a whole like maybe more than 5 minutes of me just sitting there in silence first. So no, it's not fast. It's not fast at the beginning. It takes a long time. Now I go in and it can happen almost immediately, almost immediately. But it is a muscle that you have to flex and build. And it's sometimes painful to do that for sure.
So I love that. You also mentioned, which I think is important, because a lot of people, when they think about this, or they know that they have this spiritual gift of discernment, or they know they have this inclination to feeling and maybe seeing things of a spiritual nature, they have that fear. And I
Right.
think part of that fear is indoctrinated by various faiths. And I think a part of that fear is just natural because it's the
Mhm.
unknown, it's the other
It's the
side.
unknown.
And so you kind of talked about those boundary things. And how would you explain to someone who has that fear that if they do open themselves up to this, that they can't protect themselves or that they are afraid something
Mhm.
bad will come?
That's an episode in and of itself. And I know that we've talked about that before at somewhat length. First, I would say contact me. Like, let me walk you through it. Um, because if you've watched my first episode, I had lengthy experiences, and I know so many people, it's such a common thing. If you are at all sensitive, oftentimes it's the dark things you stumble upon first because those are the things that are closer to our awareness. Maybe it's because we already have a natural fear of those things. Um, but we don't have to fall into those things. And it has to do with your personal mindset. It has to do with your personal elevation of spirit or energy. And there's a lot of different schools of thought kind of on what protections to use. For me personally, prayer is enough. Like, I know why I have this gift, I know what the purpose of this gift is, and I know it's God given, and he is going to do the work to protect me and to connect me to the people that I need to connect to. I used to live in fear of this, and I used to experience a lot of scary things. Since learning how to operate this gift, how to sit in the driver's seat myself, I no longer live that way. I don't have any more of that anxiety because I know um, that I'm being protected. I have seen the angels like around me, protecting me in moments that, I was afraid. Um, a lot of it has to do with just making a decision to not be afraid and not entertain those thoughts, not give them entry. And the other thing has to do with doing the things to put yourself and your life to a point where it's unquestionable. You're not in the darkness, you're in the light. And when you're in the light, darkness can't touch the light. The light banishes the darkness. And that will work every time.
I think that's perfect. I mean, what we've been talking about is step one and step two is preparing yourself in and of
Right,
itself as a protection. That meditation and that prayer or that opening exercise, as you sometimes call it, is your protection.
right. Yeah. So when I began, and I was so afraid, needlessly, because I mean, from the start of me trying to intentionally do this, from that very first time, I have not interacted with the darkness and the scary thing because I choose not to. Like it's not what I'm connecting to. And I have done some things with some spirits, like in situations where there were spirits that were bothering people and people were reading that as a malicious way. So I'm not saying that it's not out there. What I'm saying is that like you don't have to put yourself on a level where you need to be afraid of that. But when I was first beginning and I was afraid of it, that circle of light that I was talking about, I would literally visualize myself like laying down, like, I don't know if you want to draw it in the sand around you. And as I was drawing, I was like, love, light, God, good things, like imbuing it with the words of whatever. This is my boundary. If you do not hold these qualities, you may not pass this boundary. And that's important. Like you can literally set that for yourself by choice. And then they have to follow that as long as you hold true to that, right? If you keep that intention up, it's a wall and nothing is going to come through that unless you're giving. So
I
that's,
love
yeah, that's where I started.
that's perfect. So then step three now is spirits are showing up and you are now interpreting it. And you've referred to it as learning another language. And
Yes.
we've talked about the clairs. And will you go
Mm,
through those clairs again briefly just to explain for listeners the various ways that you are going to experience the spirits you're talking to?
right. So clairs are just words. People put names to things. I mean, every religious system has these same experiences because it's the language of the spirit. So anytime you think of anybody who's had any kind of religious experience, it falls under one of these categories. And the clairs are just words that people have placed to label what these are in like a worldly terminology. So really they have no meaning except for what we give them, just like any other word. A word is a word no matter what name we have. It means the same thing. It's what it represents. So clair is a French word which means clear. And so there are spirit senses that mirror our physical senses. We have spiritual bodies, we have physical bodies. We have a spiritual sense of sight. People who have visionary experiences, even dreams and things like that, fall under the category of spirit vision. That can be um, seen in an objective way out in the world or in a subjective way within your mind's eye. And that falls under clairvoyance. You've probably heard that word before. Most people are familiar with that one. You can also hear spiritually. And that can also be objective, where you hear a voice, disembodied voice, say something. The voice of God, I mean, Saul heard it on the road to Damascus. Or you can hear it internally, that spirit voice that's talking to you. And that falls under the category of clairaudience. And then you have the next big one is clear feeling in your body. And this is whenever you get, like that good feeling, the peace feeling, the warmth in your chest feeling, clairsentience. So sentience being within your body. That can also be emotions that aren't yours or other things. That one is a little harder to feel objectively if that happens to be something more intangible like emotions. But you can also tangibly feel things on your body, like I was talking about with a hand on your shoulder or a hug around you or someone touching your hair or any kind of like standing next to you feeling. That also falls under that umbrella of clear feeling. Then you have clear knowing, which is clear cognizance. And I mean, in any time you've ever had like a sudden burst of inspiration, something just came to you, that intuition that you've just known without any reason for having known that. Mother's intuition is a great example of this, where you just know suddenly your child is doing something that it's supposed to be doing downstairs with a permanent marker or opening that bag of chocolate chips and spilling it all over the kitchen. That's clear cognizance. It's being tuned in to suddenly know something without a prompting or an external indicator of why you know that thing. And then there are two lesser known ones, which are always fun to experience, but maybe less useful, which is clear smelling or clear aliens, and clear tasting, which is clear gustance. And people experience those kinds of things all the time too. I mean, if you smell grandma's perfume, she's been gone for 10 years and it's in your house, not hers house. Like, where does that come from? Tasting is a little bit more strange. I mean, I've tasted all kinds of things from strawberries to cookies to blood. So it's always wild to experience that. It's like there's no reason that you could experience those, but the spirits are capable of showing you those things too. And so all of those senses we can all receive, and they can manifest themselves, and different people will, just like you might have one preferential way of learning information, like maybe you're a visual learner, or maybe like Camille, you're a kinesthetic learner and you have to like do or move. Oftentimes you have one sense that might be stronger than the other senses. You might be somebody who sees a lot of things or somebody who feels a lot of things. And oftentimes those spirits, our loved ones who come with us too, they also have a preferential way of showing information. So it kind of works both ways. That doesn't mean that you only receive information in that way or messages in that way, because you have all your senses, no matter if you are a visual learner or not. So, and they can all be worked on and grown, which are some of the things that we actively do on like our Thursday night meetups.
I love it. Tell me then, what are you supposed to say? Like, what is this conversation that you're having? You often have taught us a short list of questions to go over, which are kind of good grounding, informational questions that you would probably ask anybody in a first conversation. So what are you talking about? Because I imagine some people are like, hi, grandma. Why are you here? Why am I smelling your perfume? What's going on? Why didn't you
Um,
leave me anything in the inheritance?
when you're talking to your own loved one, I mean, the format is different because there's obviously a context. You have a relationship, you have a history, these things fall back on. And conversation is much more, hopefully, natural, where it flows of like, maybe you have something you want to say, or they have something that they want to say, and or comment or help you with. Like when I was planting raspberries one time at our house in Pennsylvania where we used to live, my grandmother was a prolific gardener. um, I wasn't sure. I had never planted raspberry bushes before, and I wasn't sure like how deep to plant it because it's just this little stick, right? It doesn't have anything on it. It's like a cane. You could like smack somebody with that and throw it away. Like, will it grow? I don't know. It's like, what do I do? And so I sat there and I was like digging this hole. I didn't know how deep to go. I didn't know if, like how much water I should put it in. I didn't know like what kind of fertilizer I should use. And so I asked my grandma. And I got an impression. I heard her voice tell me, about this deep stop. I was like, okay, cool. She's like, put it in. And like, I saw her in my mind. I had a memory that she brought forward of me watching her, because numerous times I watched her, but not a memory that maybe I was capable. My memory is really bad. So not a memory maybe I was conscious of remembering or could pull forward at will. But I remembered seeing her plant, not raspberries particularly, but other similar things. And so I was like, oh, right, this is how it's done. So when it's with your loved ones, like don't stress about a format because it's not necessary. They're gonna give you those subtle feelings and impressions. They're gonna be around you. They love you and they care about the context of what's happening in your life. Um, when I connect for somebody who's not mine, um, this is where it gets really important for me personally because let me state, like, I call myself a skeptic. Totally. Like, I have a very strong logical filter. I'm a science-based personality, very rationally minded. And it's amusing how ironically at odds this gift and the intuitive gifts are with like my natural context of thought. And so, for me, the evidence is really important. How do you know that you're not just insane? How do you know that you're not just making things up, pulling them out of the air? And I think it's important for, the person that you're talking to too, because it, we all are human beings with highly creative minds. We really could just pull things out of the air. Could we pull correct things out of the air? To a certain percentage of possibility, yes. Could we do it 60% of the time or 70% of the time? Probably not. And so for me, the most important thing is starting with evidence, with context of who that person is, and making sure you establish a baseline for amount of correct information. You're not just guessing things. They're giving you information. You're seeing them. You're hearing them. You're feeling them. They're telling you. And so you can describe what they look like. You can describe their personality. You can describe their job, their mode of passing, their how many kids they had, how many brothers and sisters they had, what their parents did, where they lived, all those kinds of things. And so for me, starting with that is the most important because then you can judge yourself and judge for, whoever you are helping out if you have this gift. That there is real context to what's going on. It's not just make believe. It's not just random. That there really is information being exchanged. There really is that person present having a conversation with you. So that is the things that I start with. Really, any kind of conversation can be had if you just have a conversation with someone new, like all the time. Like
Where are you from? What do
where
you
are
do
you
for a
from?
living?
What did you
What do you
do?
like
Like,
to do on the weekend?
do you have any kids? What's your favorite food? Like, all these things are relevant questions. There's really no dumb question.
That's awesome. You've been talking to spirits for 5 years or so, 5+ years.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
have you collected and learned about life on the other side?
Now that is a huge question.
Yep.
I'm like, let's pull out the sticky chart. We'll walk through it one by one. Let me think of like top three things, maybe. I think the one thing that probably has impressed me the most, that sticks with me all the time, is how present they are with us all the time, how aware of us they are all the time. It makes some people really uncomfortable to think about this way. I've had people tell me that more than once. But the spirit world, like it's very, very close to us. There's a reason why we use the word veil as separation. When you think of a veil, like it's like gauze. It is see-through, it is billowy, it is light material, like it is made of stuff like this bag. Yeah, right. Like a bridal veil, all of the purpose is just to separate something, to have a barrier between something that is not yet accessible fully. And I think another misconception to people wondering about how the spirit works is like, oh, well then like all access pass, like you must know all the things, you must have the answers, the insight. I feel like I maybe get bit more than most people because of these conversations, but definitely they can't give us everything, and I don't know exactly what it feels like to go through that. I know what they've shown me. I don't know exactly what it looks like on the other side. I get bits, I get pieces, I build a map over time of the things they tell me, and I'm always excited to run across something new. I'm like, oh cool, I'll put that on my string chart right here for right now. But they lie so closely to us. Really, it's a matter of like turning your head. It's it is directly on top of what we experience, the spirit world. And so there's not a huge gulf of separation like we feel. I mean, death is a pretty huge thing, and I'm not going to minimize that. It is a traumatic experience for most people to lose someone. But if you could just know or experience really the non-separation that happens with that separation, it is so close. And I often will tell people, for me with like spirit communication, they're like, what does it feel like? What's it like? It's like having a conversation with you, Rachel, in front of me, and then turning my head and having a conversation here. That is how close it is. It's just a turn of a head. It's a shift of perception. It's a different way of looking at something. And that is where the spirit world is. So that I think is probably the biggest impactful thing that I have learned doing this. The other thing is that it's not a scary thing. Um, of course, I'm not like looking to shorten my time here by any means, but like you never die alone. There's always someone there to meet you. And there are always people on the other side waiting for you, that you are immediately encircled and embraced. So it's not a scary thing to pass through that veil. And it's usually passing into love and passing into light in an extraordinary way. And so almost every person that I've talked with on the other side, that I've communicated with on the other side, will say that. And I think that has really impressed me as somebody who um, speaks to a lot of dead people. I am very aware of all of the ways that your life can end. And that is
That's
kind
not
of
dark.
an anxiety inducing state. But it's really gone a long way. The comfort and the knowledge that there is something next. There is a plan behind it. And there is someone who is like holding the strings to that plan. And it has really reasserted to me the reality of a loving God. And I think that is the number three biggest thing. I mean, these were things that I kind of knew before, not like knew before, but doing this work, it has made it a reality in a different way for me. And those probably are my biggest takeaways. They're not terribly exciting, I'm sorry, but like really internalizing that knowledge, it's life changing. It's game changing.
So we've gone through your steps, how to prepare yourself, what you're saying when you're connected. Can you give us an
The
example?
dummy version, the dummy book version. How to
Yes.
Speak to Spirits 101 class starting this fall.
So tell us, yes, tell us some of your, if you're willing, most memorable spirit communications.
Most memorable. Um, I think the most memorable are the ones that really impact people. Because that is what this is about. When it leaves somebody with like a life-changing experience, when they've had a really traumatic loss and are having a hard time moving through that grief. Um, those are the moments I'm like, this is what it's about. This is what it's for. And I have been blessed to have many of those experiences. Not giving names or anything. I had a session with one woman who had lost her son, and it had been many, many years, but she hadn't been able to move. He was an adult. He was in his early 20s, I believe. He hadn't been able to move on, or she hadn't been able to move on. And she was really worried due to the circumstances around his passing that he hadn't been able to move on either. And she had actually contemplated ending her life more than one time. And she didn't tell me this, but he did. And he told her, um, first of all, he gave some amazing, like very, very clear validation and evidence. Like he came to me in almost picture clarity. He was like, this is what I look like. This is my favorite ball cap. I wore it all the time. Like this is how I wore my facial hair. He showed me what his room looked like. And he showed me the Winnie the Pooh stuffy that sat next to her bed that he gave her and reminded her of him. Um, and he told her, your time isn't now, and don't entertain those thoughts because you have a lot more work to do, and I'm going to be helping you do those things. And he like outlined things that she had left to do in her life, people that were depending on her, and she just wept because she had had those experiences. She'd come close to the edge more than one time. And her son, brought her back from that edge. And what an amazing experience to partake with the both of them. How sacred. Um, there have been numerous of those. I have had the unfortunate experience of dealing with people recovering from suicides of loved ones frequently. I have had my brother-in-law. He took his own life a year after we got married. The first Christmas I had as a married couple was his funeral. And so I have maybe personal experience, personal buy-in with that has informed a lot of that. Um, but those are always very heartbreaking. Um, One that happened more recently that was really interesting because this one wasn't planned. I had been with a group of women. We'd been having a party, and it came up, sometimes it does, that I do this, and this woman casually mentioned that there was a spirit in her house, and it was scaring them all. And this one is more unusual. I don't usually handle things like hauntings as commonly, but I just had a feeling, I was like, tell me more about that. That's not normal. Like, let's talk about this. And she went into telling me that the house that they live in, the whole back of their upstairs is basically unusable because they all get this very scary feeling going back there. Her two girls won't sleep in their bedrooms. They can't use the bathroom back there, especially at night. Like even her husband, he used to sleep with the girls back there. He told them to like come sleep in their room with them for like 4 years. This couple has been sleeping with their children in their room. I was like, let me help you. Let's not do that. So that night we made this jaunty little trip. We walked across the block to her house and we went in, and immediately I knew where this spirit was in this house. And I went back to the room where he was, and immediately I felt him in the closet. And I was like, did you lose a brother? And she said, yes. And I was like, was it a heroin overdose? And she was like, yes. And I was like, was he 42? I don't remember if that was his exact age, but she was like, yes. And I was like, and he looks like this? And she's like, yes. I was like, well, it's your brother. It's all right. It's not a malicious spirit. We're cool. But it was a beautiful experience because the circumstance in that situation happened to be that he was around them and they all could feel him, but he had passed in such circumstances. They weren't good circumstances, and he had a lot of regret in his life. And he was attracted to the goodness of her and her beliefs and her children. And he longed to be around that because she was one of the only people in his family that still accepted him. And so he would try to retreat to the back parts of their house because he knew he was making them uncomfortable. But he just needed so much to be around his loved ones. And so, able to facilitate as I was able to begin a communication between them, and to the point where um, she could understand what it was and who it was that was there. And immediately the tone in the whole home changed, like immediately shifted to one of anxiety and darkness to one of peace and hope. And all of a sudden they were able to use all their bedrooms and their bathrooms again, which was great. And she was just blown away by the fact that it was her brother. And in fact, she was able to recall a time shortly after his passing where she did in fact feel him, and feel him try to communicate with her, but it scared her so badly that she pushed it away. And she pinpointed that as the beginning of these happenstances in her house. Um, and so that was a huge one too, being a more recent example, like a night and day shift difference. And I checked back in with her a couple weeks later and I was like, how's it going? Is your house still peaceful? Are you using all your bedrooms? And she was like, yes, the girls are sleeping in their rooms, and like, I can't thank you enough. And I was like, it's good to have your own personal marital space. But just amazing how life-changing it can be to have people um have more knowledge and understanding of something that wasn't actually scary, that wasn't actually bad, that was occurring in their life. They just didn't realize the truth behind the situation. And once they did, being able to rectify all of it and having it not be scary and have her feel like she was helping her brother and connecting with him again. And he is able to move forward on the other side out of that place of darkness in the same way. I mean, it's beautiful. It's amazing. And being able to help people find that kind of healing and peace, both a burden and a blessing. I've seen amazing things, and I'm at once so very grateful and so very overwhelmed and intimidated by the potential.
Can we go back just a little bit and spend 1 minute talking about all of these people you've experienced on the other side who've committed suicide? Because that is a massive fear for people who have
Right.
lost someone in that way, that they're damned, that they're lost, that they're gone, that there is no hope for them, that the devil has them, whatever people's faith traditions are, there's usually a horribly negative connotation for what's happened to them on the other side. But what has been your experience?
My experience has been that God is prevalent and ever knowing and all loving. I use an analogy, perhaps I've used it before in the podcast, of a staircase a lot with a lot of people. Um, it's a progression of our spirit. We progress here on the earth, and we don't stop progressing after we pass. And wherever we are in our life as a person, as human evolution, we enter the staircase at some point on the other side. Most people enter it some various point in the middle. Like the top, there's God, it's heaven, it's the top, right? The bottom is lost. People that end up lost. Most people that I've talked to, and there have been dozens. I mean, there's a lot of people I've talked to on the other side who have passed via their own choice. To do that, to take your life from the physical plane, it's not an easy thing for most people. There are circumstances involved. There's a variety of different reasons, but they're usually not well-informed or happy reasons, right? And so that usually puts you someplace lower on the staircase. But like I said, you never pass alone. And 90% of the time, you're passing into the hands of someone who loves you very much and is aware of you, and they are going to help you on that other side. There is usually regret, but it's not hopeless. It's not hopeless. You're not damned to hell. There is not a loss for you that you can never work through or become more than that. I have never come across that, and I don't believe it exists. Most people are someplace different than when they took their life. For example, my own brother-in-law. He was not in a good place, obviously. But he's changed a lot on the other side. And experiencing him now is completely different than when I experienced him 10 years ago. I have felt a shift with him, and I am very familiar with his energy. He's around my husband quite a bit. And in that analogy, he's moved up that staircase. He's done personal work for himself, where he's in a much healthier place. He is what I would say is a helpful spirit. There have been instances where my mother-in-law has had friends who have been on the edge of pulling a trigger or on the edge of taking their own life. And they have come to her afterwards and told her, I felt him there, felt him in the seat next to me in that moment. And he said, don't do it. Don't do it because you have so much to live for. And they didn't. And they will come tell her that afterwards. And she'll come tell me that. I'm like, he tells me that all the time. Like, yes, they turn around and they help other people who are in those circumstances too, especially if they have loved ones or friends that are going through similar circumstances. There is forgiveness. There is redemption. And we all will see it at one point or another because God doesn't give up on us. The other side doesn't give up on us. And there are generations of people that care. People we don't even know, that we have not had any contact with, that care and are there to help us achieve our own salvation, because it's their salvation too. And I fully believe that 100%. And I have seen it. especially with people who feel like they have left with no hope, and especially with their loved ones who feel like they were left with no hope. There's always hope. There's always redemption. Nobody is stuck forever.
That's beautiful. I love that. To finish, to conclude, to wrap up, will you give us one more story about a spirit communication that was the most important to you?
So, to answer that question, I have to get a little bit religiously technical because, we try to include all faiths in this podcast because I think it's really important. Whether you're Christian or whether you're Muslim or whether you're Hindu or something, I don't know. I feel like this gift can apply to everyone. I personally am Christian. My own personal faith is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I can only apply this to my own context. But we have sacred buildings called temples. And we do ordinances. We do like baptisms, for instance, and offer up the ability to be baptized to people who've passed on and can't take that ordinance, can't perform that with their own physical body. We act as proxy. Um, I have had numerous experiences in these buildings. Everything from seeing angels to seeing loved ones of people that are mine or people that are very close to me who have lost loved ones, um, including um, a really good friend of mine who had lost someone very, very close to her. And I was with this group and we were doing baptisms for the dead, as we do. And she was sitting across the room from me, and it hadn't been very long since their loved one had passed, and it was very, very traumatic for their family. And as she was sitting across the room from me, I saw this person come up behind her and put her hand like on her, I think. Can't remember if it was her hand or if she hugged her, but she came up and she touched her, and I saw it happen. And I was so like overwhelmed because I knew what it meant to their family and how hard that loss had been. I mean, obviously, it still gets me emotional. And how amazing it was to have her be there with her loved ones in the temple. And afterward, un unprompted, this friend of mine came up to me and she was like, I felt something in the temple. And I was like, did you? Did you feel it right here? And she goes, yes. I was like, I need to witness to you that this person was there standing right behind you and that they actually touched you in this place. And she was just blown away because the physical manifestation of that person that she loved so deeply and had been so important in her life, contacting her again, physically being with her again, was huge. Like, it's monumentous. And it meant so much. And it meant so much to me that I got to witness that sacred moment. And again, it's just another testament to like how beautiful this gift can be, how life-changing it can be in other people's lives. Because all of us will lose people. All of us. None of us are immune from death. It's part of the mortal experience. And it's never easy. But it's also not the end. And I guess I can leave with that final word of reassurance that it's not the end. And it's not even the end of the relationship while we're here on Earth. Not if we really want to seek after it.
Boom. That was incredible, Elle. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. They are so good. If you guys have stories that you want to share, reach out to us. We want to hear them. So tune in next time, guys. Please like and subscribe if you're on YouTube with us. Leave us a review if you're on another podcasting platform. And tell your friends, come find us. We leave our information in the caption below.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.